Being that we all live in New York, some of you even live in New York City, we've all had the opportunity firsthand to see some of the magnificent structures around the skyline. Right, it's world renowned, right, New York City skyline. I don't know about any of you, but when I walk around the city, I never really am in fear of these buildings, these structures falling. None of them. I'm worried about these flat, and why not? Right? We know that these engineers, these architects behind these buildings, they are doing magnificent work with the engineering crews, super advanced tools that us lay people can. But these structures are impressive, and just like the times in ancient Israel, they also designed really impressive structures. So last week said. However, those tools that they use to build those structures were maybe not as advanced, but maybe just as successful. And what they really used and focused on, we're going to talk about today, is the plumb line. Right? A plumb line, I don't know if anybody's familiar with, it's a weighted rope, and they use this ancient tool. Most builders would use it. They would hang this rope from a structure, from a wall, and they would hang down with this weighted piece on the bottom, and they would see if the wall lined up with this plumb line, see if it was upright, see if it was sturdy, see if it was secure. And they would do this structure to make sure that it was safe in order for it to be there. And in Amos chapter 7, we're going to see God is using the same idea in this tool to measure the nation and the people. We can use it as a metaphor, this plumb line. And Amos, I'm not sure if any of you guys are aware, is one of the earliest prophets. He was a shepherd, farmer, right outside of the temple. And he was called mostly to prophesy to the northern kingdom of Israel. Obviously we know that the kingdom of Israel was split at this point, and he was brought to speak to the 10 tribes in the north and talk to them about what exactly is going on here. So if we could, let's turn to Amos 7, verses 7 through 9. So Amos 7, 7 through 9. And throughout the course of Israel's history, at this point, we observe that the religious leaders at this time were constantly turning their backs on God, right? The religious leaders, the people of Israel. And though God made an everlasting covenant with these people, we see in the scroll of Amos, so God is warning them of their crooked and unrighteous ways. And at this time in the northern kingdom, right before this prophet was sent out there, this was Israel was enjoying an extreme time of prosperity. This northern kingdom was doing very well. And as we know, with sometimes prosperity, what comes with prosperity? We get a little lazy, fatten up. And we saw that this time in Israel also brought idolatry, extravagance, right, corruption, and extreme oppression of the poor, as throughout the entire book of Amos. So Amos 7, 7 through 9, God shows Amos a vision. He says, "Thus he showed me, and behold, the Lord stood upon a wall made by a plumb line. With a plumb line in his hand, the Lord said unto me, Amos, what seest thou? And I said, a plumb line. Then said the Lord, Behold, I will set a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will not again pass by them any more. And the high places of Isaac shall be desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be laid waste. And I will rise against the house of Jeroboam with the sword." Right, so in these verses, we see Israel being compared to this structure. They're being compared to this wall. And they built themselves up, Israel. They're proud of this structure, right? Israel was extremely, as I said, successful. And God is trying to see how true is this? How true are they to what I am telling them to do? We're going to see here that God gives his judgment in verse 8, as we just read. He says, "I will not pass by them anymore." Right? I'm done. The high places of Isaac shall be desolate and be laid waste. Right? In other words, God's saying he looked at this people, at this structure, and found it unsound. He found it that it was flawed. It was crooked. It was not plumb with that line he was measuring with. And he said he's going to destroy their high places. Now, when we think of high places, we think of, like you said, the temple and things that were going on there. And you don't have to turn there, but in chapter 5, God says, through Amos, he says, I despise your feast days. I do not savor your sacred assemblies. Though you offer me burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them, nor will I regard your fat and peace offerings. So at this time, Israel is keeping these holy days. They're keeping the holy days just as we are. They're doing the things by the book. But yet God says, I hate them. He says, there's something wrong here. Something changed with the people of Israel. They compromised somehow. Something changed. So we know the people of Israel were still keeping these days, but God knew their works as unrighteous. What works were Israel doing now? God did it. What was so unrighteous about it? Let's go to Judges 10, verses 6. Judges 10, verses 6. We're going to see what exactly was going on here with this false idolatry that's taking place. So they had some moral, spiritual, and ethical decline, as we know, which comes with being extremely wealthy at this time. And Judges 10:6 says, "And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam, Asheroth, and the gods of Syria, the gods of Zidon, and the gods of Moab, and the gods of the children of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the Lord and served him not." Right? They're worshiping Baal, right? The host of other foreign deities. How did the children of Israel become to worship these gods? Right, if you were to look on a map, at those ancient times, these are the surrounding nations that are around Israel at this time. They're completely around them. And we see these northern tribes compromising their standards. They're letting this stuff seep in from societal pressure. It's seeping into the kingdom, these foreign deities. And if we go to 2 Kings chapter 17, we're going to see something else here. 2 Kings 17, verses 10 through 13. We're going to see the societal pressure and what Israel did. "And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. They built them in high places in their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced-in cities. And they set them up images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree. And they burned incense in high places, and did heathen works the Lord carried away before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. For they served idols, whereas the Lord had said unto them, You shall not do these things. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and Judah," right, both tribes, "by all the prophets and by the statutes, according to all the law I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you, my servants the prophets." Right? So these are the things that God was judging them on. These were the things they were doing. They turned their backs on everything that God told them not to do, based off of this influx of information and this compromise. So how did the Israelites get these practices? Right? Did they invent these gods? Did they invent this type of situations? As we know, that this stuff is around from the time of Babylon, right, all the way back to Nimrod. We could trace these foreign deities going way back. And Israel adapted these practices and compromised. And through their spiritual harlotry, like all this stuff, they abused grace. They abused what God was giving them over and over, right? And they rejected His law. And this is what God measured with that plumb line and what He saw, that compromising which leads to unrighteousness. And God is measuring His people today, as we know, right? 1 Peter 4:17. God is still using that plumb line with us. He did it with the covenant people then, and He's doing it with the covenant people now. "For the time has come that the judgment must begin at the house of God," which is us. "And if it begins at us," look at this question it says, "what shall the end of them be that do not obey the gospel of God?" What is going to happen to us if we don't obey this? With God's plumb line, the goal is to measure if we are upright. And a better word for upright is our righteousness, right? Our moral standards has to be aligned with God's. It's important to understand that it's God's standards and not ours. Anything off center of that plumb line is unrighteous, no matter how small it might be. So, imagine if a pendulum, if it swings either way, it's off. So why do we think that sometimes in ourselves that we are righteous? Why do we think sometimes outside, especially society out there, why do we think that these people is doing the right things? And we see here in Romans 10:3, it says, "For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God." They have not submitted to God. And they equate their own wisdom and knowledge to God's. And what does Scripture say about that when that happens? When people do this, what brings forth? Proverbs chapter 14, verses 12. You have to turn there, it's very quick. "There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." And that is both not physically, but as we know spiritually for those of us that are in the covenant. Are we careful to measure ourselves up to this plumb line and not our own? And Amos, right, he gives the warning to the people of Israel about this coming disaster, about this coming destruction, and from the influence of those societies around them. But God's moral standards are absolute. His plumb line is straight and steadfast, but mankind's is not, as we know. Our society justifies their own works with moral relativism, right? Moral relativism, those not familiar with philosophy, it's that it shifts, it's fluid. What's right today might not be right tomorrow, or what's right yesterday might not be right a week ago. Things keep shifting, and it justifies their own works. So as followers of God, as we say we are, we profess that we are these things, we must be careful not to fall victim to society's standards, specifically today. Mr. Ellis, you can put up that Overton window. So there is a political ideology, some sort of philosophical belief that goes on, and most politicians and society around here know today that this overton window is a shifting policy. Policy knows the laws of each country, right? They're pretty much what society believes. As we see, not law, but yet people abide by it. It's okay, these people. And it's right, sensible, and acceptable, radical, and the unthinkable goes. But what happens in our society when there's no sort of steadfast foundation? This shift. This prevents the unthinkable. And just like today, we see in today's society, right? Like a man, dressed in a woman's outfit, wearing a full beard, wants to be called a woman. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to call that man a woman, and not only call that man a woman, we're supposed to, praise that, celebrate that. And that's something that we have to come to terms with how society is changing, and what are we going to do when that pressure is put on us, right? So this is the danger of measuring ourselves with the world standards. They shift, but we know that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He is not changing his name. So without noticing this window, it is of the utmost importance that we stay upright. Isaiah speaks of this plumb line in God's judgment while he brings these things upon us. So if we go to Isaiah 28, verses 16 through 17. So Isaiah is speaking to Judah, but he's talking about this unrighteousness and the judgment that comes from it. Isaiah 28, 16 through 17. Therefore, thus says the Lord, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily. He won't jump around. Also, I'll make justice the measuring line, a righteousness the plummet or the plumb line. The hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the hiding places. Right? God, as we see here, the hail will sweep away those refuges of lies, and the waters will overflow those places. That judgment will not be able to hide from the lies. We won't be able to hide from the lies that we are keeping. And the sins that we have ignored for so long from lives, they will be exposed. Even us, within the community. Like we have to be real with ourselves. This is not just society is doing this. We come to our church on Sabbath, we're good. It's more than that. The plumb line is nothing to sneeze at. God is serious. When he holds the plumb line next to his people, he is deadly serious. Eternal life and death serious. Especially to those who are converted. And we better measure up. Within our walk, we have peaks and valleys, as we all know. This is a long, long journey. And within those valleys is where we sometimes can find ourselves compromising. I know I have. I've compromised in the past, and I'm being honest with myself. I'm pretty sure each person in here can at least admit that they have compromised in those moments as well. And the world can pull at you. That's what it does. That's why God says do not be part of it. It is tough. But God expects us to be better than that, and it's hard. During tribulations and trials is when we compromise, and someone we're going to see here who has been times of trouble compromised a little bit. So we're going to turn to Genesis. We're going to turn to Genesis. We're going to look at a situation. Now, when we think of Sodom and Gomorrah, we often most times think of their sexual sins, right? And those who listened to Mr. Ellis last week, he did an excellent job pointing out that it wasn't their only sin. There was something else going on there in Sodom and Gomorrah in those cities. And pride was a main marker in that city. And why? Right? Pride comes when we feel puffed up, when we feel successful, when we feel accomplished, when we feel we're doing the right things. Then that pride sets in. Look what I've built, right? Look at the structures I have made, right? Look at my house. Look what I've done. Look what I've come to terms. So Sodom and Gomorrah, as we know, were rich, successful cities. Sounds like the Israel that Amos was preaching to at that time. And Lot, as we know, was no exception. Lot, we know, was very wealthy. Right? Remember when Abraham and Lot, when they were dividing up the lands and all the materials, they were bumped into each other. And Abraham was like, hey, you go that way, pick whatever way you want to go. I'll go this way. That's how much space they had. That's how much material goods they had. They were very wealthy. So much so that Abraham, like we said. So when God told Lot that he was going to destroy the city, what were his instructions through the angels? What did he say to Lot and to his family? Genesis 19:17, if you can. Genesis 19:17. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, Lot and his family, that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you. nor stay anywhere in the plains, except escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Let us look and see what might happen. Read a couple of verses down, 24 through 26. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plains and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. This, brethren, when I first came into the church a long time ago, I remember reading this, and it made me sorrowful. It really made me sad, because I kind of didn't fully understand what was happening at this time. And I always thought, why did she look back, right? Because could she not let go of what was going on in that city, right? Did she have family there, right? Did she have a home where she built memories still there? Laughs she shared with dear friends, other friends that were still there. Material goods that she worked for and built over the years that, just like all of us, we built this life. We labor for this stuff, and it means something to us. And she had let go of all those things. So she compromised. She couldn't let go of that. And like Messiah said in Luke specifically, look what he says in Luke 17:32. Christ said, remember Lot's wife. Why? The next verse sort of gives us a little insight into this. He says, whoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it. And whoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. She put this world ahead of God's. She was putting too much focus, and she compromised. She compromised those beliefs. She compromised who she was in those moments. And she took her focus off our God. Our Messiah says in Luke 9:62, and Jesus said unto him, no man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. That's us. If we put our hands to the plow, when we go into those waters of baptism, we are putting our hands to the plow. And if we look back, he's saying, that's not good enough. That's scary stuff. These aren't my words. That's the Messiah saying that if you put your hands to the plow and look back, you're not good enough. And it's tough. I don't know about you, but I also feel very surreal things going on in the world. I feel like the world has changed. And I don't know about you, but I definitely see it not changing for the better. And Christ said in Luke, he said to the people, when you see a cloud rise out of the west, straightway you say, there cometh a shower. And so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, you say, there will be heat, and it comes to pass. You hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and earth, but how yet do you not discern the times that you're in? The world around us is changing drastically, and we know God's judgment is upon this house of God now. While we're in this world, he's measuring us like he did Israel. We cannot compromise who we are, what we believe in, and what we need to do while we are here. Jesus said in Matthew 17, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is that gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Think about it. There's, how many billions of people on this earth? Few find it. Are we just listening to these words, or are we going one or the other, or Lot's wife being compromised and found destruction? We can't. We can't do it. God is expecting more from us. It's pressed upon my heart to say these things here. And though they're tough to hear, this is not exactly the most uplifting, happy message of all time. But in Isaiah, he warned of this in Isaiah 30:10. They said, who says to the seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy. Judah didn't want to hear these things. Do not prophesy to us right things. Speak to us smooth things. Prophesy deceits. They didn't want to hear the tough messages. They didn't want to hear the things that were going on in 2 Kings and those things. They didn't want to hear it. Let us not make the same mistakes ancient Israel and measure ourselves by the world's standards. For we know they can easily shift and cause structures to collapse. Matthew 7, finally, on my final verse here, 24 to 25. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, Christ said, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rains descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. It was structurally sound. Let us use God's plumb line to build a sturdy, righteous, and upright house, so we may not fall.